Okay, what do your smartphone, an electric vehicle, and a fighter jet all have in common? Well, they all absolutely depend on a very specific handful of materials that we dig out of the earth. Now, at the exact same time, the entire rulebook for global trade is being torn up and rewritten at, well, lightning speed. For a while, these two massive forces were on a collision course, and in 2025, they finally slammed into each other, creating a totally new kind of global conflict.
So you have to be asking, how in the world did we get here, right? Why are the very technologies that define our modern lives suddenly at the heart of this huge, high-stakes battle between nations? The answer, it turns out, is at the intersection of geology and geopolitics, of bleeding-edge tech, and frankly, bare-knuckle trade tactics. Okay, let's dive in. So first up, we've got to look at the new rules of the game. Or maybe more accurately, the decision to just throw the old rulebook out the window completely. Because in 2025, the United States fundamentally changed how it approaches the entire global economy. For decades, trade policy was this slow, deliberate, kind of boring process. But starting in 2025, the second Trump administration began using tariffs as its go-to weapon for pretty much everything. Foreign policy, national security, domestic goals, you name it. This wasn't just about economics anymore, this was about projecting power, and it made the entire global landscape incredibly unpredictable.
Now, you might be wondering, how did they do this so fast? Well, here's the crazy part. They took this old law from 1977 called IEEPA. It was originally designed for slapping sanctions on hostile nations, but a new interpretation allowed the president to impose sweeping tariffs on basically anyone just by declaring a national emergency. And that could be anything from trade deficits to fentanyl trafficking. It instantly became this incredibly powerful and flexible economic weapon.
And if you thought that was a big deal, they also rolled out this brand new and very coercive tool, the secondary tariff. See, instead of just targeting a specific company doing business with a rival, this thing punishes an entire country. Take India, for example. When they kept buying Russian oil, the US didn't just sanction the companies involved. Nope. It slapped tariffs on all Indian goods coming into the country. The message was crystal clear. You're either with us or you're going to pay the price.
And this right here just brilliantly shows you the scale of the change. On the left, you have the old system, slow, methodical, full of checks and balances. The new America First policy on the right, it's the polar opposite, fast, driven entirely by the White House, and with almost no warning or review. You can just imagine the kind of chaos this created for businesses all over the world.
So, while this whole trade revolution was kicking off, a second, equally powerful force was reshaping our world, our incredible, staggering dependency on a special list of materials. These are Earth's most wanted.
And the scale of this dependency is just mind-blowing. 80%. Think about that. 80% of everything we mine from the ground is now considered essential for a country's economic stability. We're not talking about optional luxuries here. We're talking about the absolute fundamental building blocks of the modern world. Without them, our economies just grind to a halt.
And look, this isn't just about a few famous materials like lithium or cobalt. The U.S. Geological Survey's critical list now has 60 different materials on it. Every single one is a vital piece in our high-tech puzzle, and each one has its own fragile, incredibly complex global supply chain. That complexity, well, that's a massive source of vulnerability.
And this is where the risk becomes crystal clear. It's not just about who digs the stuff out of the ground, it's about who processes it into something you can actually use. And as you can see, China has built up a strategic chokehold on the processing for many of the most important minerals. We're talking control of anywhere from 60 to over 90% of the entire global supply.
So to make this a little more real, you can kind of think of these materials in three buckets. You've got your spice metals, like gallium, which are added in tiny, tiny amounts to make super powerful computer chips. Then there are the power metals, like lithium, which are the heart of every single EV battery. And finally, phoenix metals, like copper, the big comeback kid that literally connects all of our digital infrastructure together.
Okay, so you've got a world that is newly, desperately dependent on these critical materials, where one country basically holds all the processing cards, and then into that world you inject a radical, aggressive new trade policy. This is the collision. This is where things get really interesting and, frankly, really dangerous.
And don't just take my word for it. As this analysis from Gibson Dunn points out, this isn't some abstract conflict happening way up high between governments. No. This is a tit-for-tat, where ordinary businesses, and yes, you and me, consumers, are caught right in the crossfire, facing massive uncertainty and rising costs.
And wow, 2025 showed exactly what this looked like in practice. The whole year was just a whirlwind of economic coercion. It kicked off with maximum pressure on Iran. Then in April, you had the so-called Liberation Day, with a 10% baseline tariff slapped on most of the world. By August, those crazy new secondary tariffs were hitting India. And then in October, Russia's biggest oil companies got hit with crippling sanctions. Every single move was a new shock to the system.
So what was the result of this massive collision? Well, it was a frantic, global scramble to rewire the very supply chains that our world runs on. Pretty much everyone, from governments to giant corporations, suddenly woke up and realized how vulnerable they were and started desperately looking for ways to protect themselves.
This new reality forced a fundamental shift in how businesses think. For decades, the mantra of global business was just-in-time delivery, maximum efficiency, minimum waste. Well, now, the new mantra is just in case. Suddenly, security and reliability have become way more important than pure lean efficiency. So what are countries actually doing about it? Well, it pretty much boils down to three key strategies. First, they're diversifying partners, creating new alliances to get resources, like that new U.S. brokered deal for cobalt from the DRC and Rwanda. Second, they're trying to boost production at home with things like tax incentives. And third, they're finally looking to seriously scale up recycling, realizing that our old electronics are actually incredibly valuable urban mines. But check this out. This chart reveals a massive, and I mean massive, wasted potential. Just look at the difference here. We are great at recycling platinum group metals, a 70% recovery rate. That's awesome. But for rare earths, the things that are essential for our magnets and motors, we recycle less than 1%. Tapping into this could cut our need for new mining by up to 40%. It's a huge, huge opportunity just sitting there.
All of this, as you can see, leaves us at a really critical turning point. The old model of globalization is under immense pressure. And what comes next? Well, that's going to be defined by the answers to a few key questions in the year ahead. So here's what all the experts are watching. Is this trade whiplash between the US and China going to continue? What's going to happen with the affiliates rule, a regulation that could instantly put thousands more companies on restricted lists? And this one is huge. How will the Supreme Court rule on whether using IEPA for tariffs is even legal? And finally, is this aggressive new posture? Is it here to stay? Which really leaves us with one final massive question to think about. Are we watching the messy end of the globalized world that we've known for the last 30 years? Or are we actually seeing the birth of something new? A world that's more fractured, way more competitive, and built on a foundation of carefully guarded critical resources? The answer isn't clear at all, but one thing is for sure. The world is being rewired right before our very eyes.